Hey guys, it's Dr. Lambert here with chapter 3 of planning a nutritious diet. And so today we're going to look at the differences between a dietary requirement and a dietary allowance, identify various dietary standards and how they can be used. So, what is a dietary requirement? Oops, sorry guys. A requirement is the smallest amount of a nutrient. Here, I'm going to move myself so I'm not in the way. Um, that maintains a defined level of nutritional health. And so, what that means is that's the smallest amount of a nutrient that you need to consume to prevent a deficiency disease. And there's a lot of things that will impact requirements. Now, we have general requirements for how old you are, if you're male or female, your health status, that type of thing. But these can change over time, specifically when we are younger, pregnant, and as we get older. Some of our nutrient needs will change over the course of our lifespan. All right, so we have some different terms that we have to become familiar with. Dietary reference intakes is the broad umbrella of recommendations that we have put out in the US, or the standards. So DRIs are a variety of energy and nutrient intake standards that nutrition experts have determined or use to make dietary recommendations. So the DRIs, what falls under that umbrella is EAR, so estimated average requirement. This EAR, what it is that 50%, or how much of let me back it up, try this again. Okay. The EAR is the daily amount of a nutrient that meets 50% of a person's nutrient needs. So this is kind of where the jumping off point for figuring out RDAs. Okay, so this is a number that they've determined. If you consume this much, it meets 50% of healthy people. That meets their nutrient needs. EER, estimated energy requirement, is the average daily energy intake that meets the needs of a healthy person. And there's several different ways to calculate energy needs. We use some different equations, and we'll talk about those later on, like Harris-Benedict or Mifflin-St. Jean, which we use in clinical nutrition. We also have a rule of thumb that we use oftentimes to calculate energy needs. And so there's different formulas that we can use depending on the patient and their needs. And then the RDA, these standards of recommended intakes of several nutrients, they meet the needs of nearly 98% of healthy people. So the RDAs they are meeting the needs for most people in the population that are healthy. Now, there's some nutrients that we haven't identified a deficiency disease, but we realize that they're an important part of our overall health. And so we have established what we call adequate intakes. So adequate intakes, this would be if we have for potassium, even for sodium. A deficiency disease doesn't develop if we do not consume those. Like if we don't consume enough iron, we could develop iron deficiency anemia, correct? But with adequate intakes, we don't have an adequate intake, or we don't have a deficiency disease related to sodium or potassium, other than it can throw off some balances off in the body, but it's not a disease. And so we have recommendations on how much we consume of those items. And then UL, or tolerable upper limit intake, or upper level, this is the highest average amount of a nutrient that you can consume without it being harmful. And so this, we often have these ULs for our fat soluble vitamins and our minerals. Okay. So how are the RDAs established? We looked at those terms, but we figure out what is a margin of safety. So we want to meet the needs of most people, but we don't want them to overconsume. So they use the EAR, which is the number that was established to meet the needs for 50% of the people. And then they go just slightly further to meet 97 to 98% of the population. So we have to establish the EAR first, and then establish an RDA. And so RDAs and adequate intakes, if we are consuming that nutrient within those guidelines, we are at very low risk for deficiency or toxicity. If we are below that, we are at risk for deficiency diseases. If we are above that, we are at risk for toxicity. Okay. So we have those standards established, and we use those to help plan diets. So for example, I do some consulting in nursing homes, and one of the requirements is that we meet calorie, protein, fat needs, and we also have to meet vitamin and mineral needs for the residents in the menus that we provide them. And so they create menus, their cycle menu. It's usually every 4 weeks, it cycles, but within that menu, it is meeting the RDAs of all of the vitamins and minerals for the elderly population, in addition to meeting energy, fat, protein needs as well. We can also use these standards to evaluate someone's diet. So if we have nutrition analysis software, or even if you've used like a MyFitnessPal or something like that, oftentimes they have vitamin and minerals in there, and it'll show you how much you've consumed. And once we do our dietary analysis project, you're going to have that information from NutriCalc, like how did you meet the needs, or did you meet the standards for vitamin C, vitamin A, vitamin D? Were you below or above on your intake of those vitamins? And so it can help us evaluate the overall quality of someone's diet. All right, so let's talk a little bit about food groups here. So most of you are familiar with the major food groups, and in general, there's 5 groups: grains, dairy, protein foods, fruits, and vegetables. And so in our grain products, this is going to be things like bread, rice, pasta, cereal, oats. They are mostly made up of carbohydrates and protein. Generally speaking, grains are low in fat unless they are made with fat. So like donuts are higher in fat, but it's because we've added fat to them to make them taste good, actually. We also because how grains are processed, when we take the wheat and we strip it to get to the flour, that actually pulls out a lot of nutrients. And so we identified that this was a problem for a lot of people, that some of those nutrients were being stripped, and so that we are finding people that were low in certain B vitamins. So now we enrich our grain products. And so basically what that means, enrichment, is adding vitamins that were lost during the milling process. We also fortified foods, and if we fortify a food, we're adding a new or an additional nutrient to a food to boost its level of that nutrient. So we may add, a good example of fortification is adding calcium to orange juice. Orange juice doesn't naturally have calcium, but we had identified that people were not consuming enough calcium, but they were consuming orange juice. So some orange juices are fortified with calcium to improve intake for certain populations. Ideally, with grains, we want to be eating whole grains because they have more fiber and more nutrients than the refined grains. We'll talk a little bit about portion sizes, but just in general. So for your grains, and a lot of people think grains are bad for you, and they're really not. They have lots of essential nutrient in them. But a serving size is 1 slice of bread. A half a cup of cooked oatmeal is considered a serving. 3/4 of a cup of dry cereal is a serving. A half a cup of pasta Can you imagine eating a half a cup of spaghetti? Nobody does that, right? So a lot of times people say grains make us fat. Well, it's not really making us fat. We tend to just overconsume them because our portion sizes are off. But they are actually a very important part of our diet. Dairy, unfortunately, dairy consumption is going down, but it's really an important part of our diet and provides a lot of good nutrients, including calcium, protein, phosphorus, riboflavin. And so things that would be included in this, of course, are milk. A serving of dairy, 8 ounces of milk, a container of yogurt, things that we have to think about with like yogurt. A lot of times there's a lot of added sugar in those to make them taste better. So if we're watching our overall added sugar intake, we just need to be aware of that. And we typically want to choose the lower fat varieties of milk because it does contain saturated fat. But generally speaking, dairy products are very healthy for us and very nutrient dense. You can get dairy alternatives, but if you're going to use almond milk or soy milk, you want to make sure that they have calcium, riboflavin added back to them. And a lot of them are fortified with those things so that you're getting some of the same qualities that you would get from cow's milk. Okay. Things that aren't included: butter, cream cheese, cream. Eggs are not in dairy. I don't know where that came from, but they're not dairy. They're protein. All right. Protein rich foods. So this is going to be your meat products and your non-meat sources of protein. So like beans, peas, eggs, nuts, seeds, and then of course all your beef, pork, fish, poultry, that type of thing. Protein rich foods are good sources of iron, zinc, and B vitamins. With protein, 1 ounce is considered a serving. So if you look at the size of the palm of my hand and about that thick, 3 ounces is what most people we recommend to consume at a mealtime. Generally speaking, so we only need about 6 ounces of protein per day. So unless you're working out really hard or you have some other condition where you have increased protein needs, most of us eat more protein than we need. We're never really deficient in that area, especially if we're consuming animal protein sources. Fruits, this include fresh, dried, frozen, juices, any of those are considered fruits. Now, portion sizes for fruit, they vary because of the differing water and sugar content. And so they are good sources of phytochemicals, potassium, folate, vitamin C. 1 serving of fruit is around 60 calories. And so servings would be like a half a cup of orange juice is considered a serving. And most people don't drink half a cup. That would be 4 ounces. So one of those little squat cups that you get, in the cafeteria, that's considered a serving of orange juice. An apple about the size of my fist or a baseball. That same would be true for an orange or a peach or a pear. A small banana. Now, because melons contain more water, you can have like a cup of strawberries and 1 1/4 cups of watermelon and that type of thing, because they have more water and are less concentrated in sugar. Another good example of the different sizes of fruit is if you have grapes, you can have about 17 grapes versus if you wanted raisins, you would have just this little box, one of those little boxes of raisins that you snack. That's considered a serving. Vegetables, this can be anything: fresh, cooked, canned, frozen, vegetable juices. They're good sources of fiber. They have lots of micronutrients, and they're also full of phytochemicals. So we kind of have 2 types of vegetables. We have starchy vegetables, which include like your peas, potatoes, beans, that type of thing. And then we have non-starchy vegetables, which include carrots, broccoli, lettuce, spinach, those type of things. Now with serving sizes for vegetables, it's a half a cup cooked or 1 cup raw. Now for our starchy vegetables, they're more about 80 calories per serving, whereas our non-starchy vegetables, a half a cup of cooked green beans is only around 25 calories, but it gives you a lot of micronutrients and it gives you fiber, so it can help fill you up. So that's why we recommend that we always need to be eating more. We can eat more volume if we're consuming more vegetables for the same amount or less calories than maybe some other foods in our diet. So we also, other foods, food guides may have groups for oils and how much fat we should be consuming in our diet. They also will sometimes there's some different food guides that will talk about combination foods and how you count those. Do you count them as a like a grain, a protein, and a fat, and that type of thing? So it kind of depends on which food guide that you're looking at. The one that we pay attention to the most is MyPlate, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. Okay, let's talk about the dietary guidelines. The dietary guidelines come out every 5 years, and they're looking at, most of the time, they're giving recommendations on how to just be healthier overall, in particular to our eating habits. So following a healthy eating pattern across the lifespan, getting variety of nutrient density and amount of foods, limit calories from added sugars and saturated fats, and reduce sodium intake, shift to healthier food and beverage choices, and then support healthy eating patterns for all. So it's kind of vague, that supporting healthy eating patterns for all, but how I like to eat and how somebody else likes to eat is going to be different, and we need to recognize that we're not all the same, but if we're making healthy, good choices, we want to support that. So a healthy eating pattern, this would be eating a variety of vegetables, including whole fruits, whole grains, low-fat dairy products, and then a variety of protein foods to include animal and plant proteins, and then limiting saturated fats. So when we learn about fat, you'll know that saturated fats come from animal products and they're solid at room temperature. Trans fats are made when we take a oil and make it into a solid. So like when margarine sometimes has trans fats, Crisco shortening. We want to limit our consumption of those because they are bad for our heart health, and limit added sugar and sodium. Focus on variety, nutrient density, and amount of food. So we want to be eating all the different colors. So maybe you've heard like eat the rainbow. It's not a bad idea, and that's actually some pretty good advice. So eating vegetables from all kinds of different sources, eating a variety of fruits, and then making sure that when you're consuming grains, at least half are whole grains. Consume fat-free or low-fat dairy products, eat a variety of protein foods, and then consume oil or cook with oils and try to limit your use of butter. Now I'm going to tell you this. We don't want to be eating a diet high in fat, but like, you know what? Cookies made with butter are just better. I'm just saying. Okay. So we also, and they're okay once in a while, just not every single day. Limit calories from added sugars and saturated fat, reduce sodium intake. The easiest way to do that is to be eating more maybe at home and preparing our own food. So eating less than 10% of our total calories from added sugars, consume less than 10% of our daily calories from saturated fat, and less than 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day. So to put that sodium number into perspective, 1 teaspoon of sodium is 2,300 milligrams. Now we use sodium in a lot of our processed foods because it binds to water and it helps reduce waste and cause going bad faster. So a lot of our mass-produced foods have a lot of sodium, and it would actually be really hard to only consume 2,300 milligrams per sodium per day if we're not eating almost everything fresh or frozen foods and making them ourselves. But we can reduce our intake of those by consuming more fruits and vegetables and fresh products. So we do have some specific guidelines for certain populations, like women who are at the childbearing age. We want them to limit the amount of seafood that they're containing or that they're eating because of mercury poisoning possibly. We also want them to eat iron-rich foods and make sure they're consuming enough folic acid. And then they shouldn't be consuming alcohol. All right. So more things. Consume more nutrient-dense vegetables, drink water instead of sugary drinks, achieve or maintain a healthy body weight. So they talk about increasing your physical activity and getting in plenty of activity each day, and then choosing low-fat dairy options. All right, so let's look at the what are some guides that we can use to help us plan our diet? And probably the one that you guys are probably most familiar with is MyPlate. And MyPlate really looks at it talks about food and including a variety of foods. But when you look at the MyPlate guidelines, it also encourages activity and all those things. So this is what it looks like. I'm sure you guys have seen this before. And if you look at it, it wants half your plate should be grains and protein. And then the other half, a portion of it to be fruit, vegetables, and dairy. So this is just a good visual on like how maybe each meal could be put onto your plate, and it encourages us to consume more fruits and vegetables throughout the day. So if you get online with MyPlate, you can find like some sample meal plans. They have all kinds of resources on there. I recommend that you get on there and look to help you kind of figure it out. You can even make a little profile, and it can give you recommendations on how many calories you need and that type of thing. NutriCalc is going to do that too as part of your dietary analysis project, so you'll have that available as well. There's other food guides. Some of you have probably heard about the Mediterranean diet, which is rich in like fish and olive oil and canola oil and monounsaturated fats and whole grains. And then we have some others that we use as well, but most of us are probably most familiar with the MyPlate here in the US. And so, do Americans really follow the recommendations from MyPlate and the dietary guidelines and all those kinds of things? Well, no, not really. We don't eat enough fruits and vegetables or dairy. We consume plenty of protein and we consume plenty of grains, but we really lack in those other areas. And oftentimes we're eating a lot more added sugar and sodium and fat than we need. And part of that is if we're eating out all the time, or just our quick and easy things that we're making at home sometimes are not always the healthiest options. Now, there's another menu planning system out there, and it's called the Exchange System. And so we have used this for years in teaching diabetics how to manage their blood sugars. And so it breaks foods down into carbohydrates, meats, meat substitutes, and fats. And so under your carbohydrates, you have grains, fruit, milk, and some of your vegetables. And then you have your meats, your meat substitutes, you have high fat, low fat, medium fat meats, and then you have your fats. And it gives you a plan, like how many servings of carbs do you need? And if you need 5 servings per meal, you can divide that up between your fruits and your grains and your dairy and make that a meal plan. So this was really popular for a long time in helping people manage diabetes, but it kind of became difficult for some people. And then we realized that carb counting for diabetes was kind of a better way to go. It allowed a little more freedom for patients. And you've probably heard of carb counting in just general, but the problem with that is some people don't realize how many carbs they should be eating a day. And actually 50% of your calories should be coming from carbohydrates. So if you're eating 2,000 calories a day, 50% of your calories would be 1,000. And then if carbs are 4 calories per gram, that's 250 grams of carbs per day. Now, what you also have to know is how many grams of carbs are in each serving. So like one slice of bread has 15 grams of carbs. A half a cup of oatmeal has 15 grams of carbs. And so you having that information, then you can plan your meals out accordingly. But it does allow for you to add some like, cake or something like that once in a while so you can enjoy what you're eating. All right, so kind of moving on here. Food and dietary labels. So now we have the nutrition facts panel, and we have a newer version, and this is now required on all products, and it used to not be, but it's trying to help people make better choices about what they're eating. And so it has to provide information about energy and nutrient contents. It also tells you the serving size, how many servings are in a package, and it has a list of certain nutrients on the label. So now what is required to be on the label is, you can see here you have your how many servings are in the whole container. So how many servings are in this can? What is the serving size? How many calories? And then this information, your fat, cholesterol, sodium, carbohydrates, tell you this is how much you're consuming for one serving of food. Okay, it also gives you fiber, and now they're including added sugars in those food labels. They also have to include information about vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium. And the reason why these nutrients are required is because, generally speaking, Americans do not consume enough of those. They have to have their ingredients listed. Now, when you look at the ingredients list, it is not listed in alphabetical order or anything like that. They list the ingredients by weight. So whatever is the most ingredient in that food, that will be listed first. That's important to know, because sometimes, like if you look at some of these cereals or maybe even drinks, and the first thing is high fructose corn syrup or whatever type of sugar, your clue is, so this is mostly made up of sugar and not much else. So that can help you in making your food choices. You'll see over here on the label this percent daily values. And so that percent daily value, that is based on a 2,000 calorie diet. It is what that food product, how that meets the RDAs based on a 2,000 calorie diet. Okay, so you want to get 100% of daily value for vitamins and minerals and fiber each day, and then limit fat and sodium and sugar. And so that's what that percentage daily value. It's kind of confusing for a lot of people. And when I teach food labels, I tell people not to pay a whole lot of attention to them, but they're there if you want to use them for reference. On our labels, they do allow, the FDA allows certain things to be on a label. They can have some health claims, like to describe relationships between a food or ingredient. So like this says, may reduce your risk of heart disease. It can't say eating black beans will reduce your risk of heart disease or prevent a heart attack, because they can't say that for certain. It might help because it's higher in fiber, but just because you eat black beans doesn't mean that you're never ever going to have a heart attack. Okay. Other health claims, the health claims should indicate the product has health benefits, be complete and easy to understand, refer to a product that contains 10% or more of the daily value before fortification, be a product intended for people over the age of 2, use may or might to describe relationships. It cannot quantify degree of risk reduction, but it can indicate that many factors influence the disease. The FDA also allows structure and function claims. So these are like calcium builds bone. So if if something has calcium in it, they could put that on there, or fiber maintains bowel regularity, but they cannot say that it prevents or treats a serious health condition. Other labeling things, sometimes you'll see light and light. What this means is that it has at least either a third fewer calories or contains at least half the fat of the original food. So if there's a regular version and a light version, it will have to meet one of those two criteria. And then as of November 2017, the term natural could be used on the label if they don't contain any type of synthetic flavors, food colorings, or any other unnatural substances. Dietary supplements also have to have labels. It has to say that it's a dietary supplement. It does have to include all the ingredients. It needs to tell you what the serving size, and then based on the serving size, it has some general information. Let's see. It can make some structure and function claims, but they also have to have on here that the statement has not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, care, or prevent any disease. So we kind of talked about that a little bit before about these supplements, but they have to put those disclaimers on there that they are not curing or preventing any type of disease, just as foods can't say that either. All right, guys, that's all of chapter 3. If you have any questions, let me know, and I hope you guys have a great week.